because namaz.
Yeah, Bismillah.
Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the first night of a five-part series led by Shaykh Muzaffer Hyder. Today is Friday, the 1st of October, the eve of the 23rd of my Safar. Can I please begin the program by inviting Brother Shaykh Abbas for Surah Yasin? Wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردن الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا مهدرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you very much, Brother Khaim, for that Surah Yasin. Can I now invite Brother Farouk Hyder to recite Salam? Bar Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے زندہ کے علم سہ کر جب وار سے غم آئے کربل کی فضاؤں میں پابند ستم آئے فریاد و غاں کرتے سب اہل حرم آئے فریاد و فغاں کرتے سب اہل حرم آئے زینب نے کہا اٹھو عباس کے ہم آئے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے گالوں پہ سکینہ کے وہ نیل تماچوں کے زخمی تھا بدن اس کا دروں کی اذیت سے ہر گام پہ کہتی تھی امو ہے کہاں میرے ہر گام پہ کہتی تھی امو ہے کہاں میرے زینب نے کہا اٹھو عباس کے ہم آئے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے پھر دکھ تر زہرا پر آفت کی گھڑی آئی تھی شام کے راہوں میں ہر سمت تماشائی اور طوق میں جکڑا تھا عابد کا گلا بھائی اور طوق میں جکڑا تھا عابد کا گلا بھائی زینب نے کہا اٹھو عباس کے ہم آئے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے دربار وہ حاکم کا سر ننگ تیرا کنبا چادر کے عوض ہم نے بالوں سے کیا پردہ بھیا تیری زینب کے بازو تھے رسن بستہ بھیا تیری زینب کے بازو تھے رسن بستہ زینب نے کہا اٹھو عباس کے ہم آئے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے احساس کی دنیا کا پردرد تھا وہ منظر تھا حشر بپا کا زینب کا بیان سن کر زندان میں سکینہ کو کھو آئی تیری خواہر زندان میں سکینہ کو کھو آئی تیری خواہر زینب نے کہا اٹھو عباس کے ہم آئے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے شبیر کا چہلم ہے صلوات بر محمد و آل محمد
اللهم صل على Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you very much, Brother Farrell, for that salam. Brothers and sisters attending online, once again, welcome to tonight's session, the first, inshallah, of a 5-part series Thank you very much, brother, for that salam. Brothers and sisters attending online, once again, welcome to tonight's session, the first of a 5-part series led by Shaykh Muzaffer Hyder, inshallah. The plan for...
Sorry, Ehsan, we can't see your video. Can you switch that on, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Could be on. Just a second. I think my webcam's stopped working. I'll try and fix it later, inshallah. I think my webcam stopped working. Geez, sorry about that. Just a quick rundown of what will be the rest of tonight's program, inshallah. What will come next will be the lecture by Shaykh Muzaffer, and then following this, we will have Matam and Ziyarat. And inshallah, after this, that should take us to around 8:15. After that, we will inshallah have a question and answer session, again with Shaykh Muzaffer, where everyone who's joined online, either via YouTube or via Zoom, you can join and ask any questions you've got regarding the topic that Shaykh has been discussing either today or going across the rest of the days to come. That's it from me. So can I now request Shaykh to please unmute his audio and to deliver tonight's lecture? And please can we welcome him with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبا القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody. I'd like to start by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this golden opportunity and thanking the honorable organizers of this event, and also extending my gratitude and my thanks to everybody who could make it. You could have been anywhere in the world. You could have been playing games. You could have been, I don't know, making yourself busy with all sorts of things, but you chose to come here, and that shows that you're willing to learn, you want to know more, and your heart is open to reception. Inshallah, I'd like to ask everybody of the honorable listeners out there to recite a Surah Fatiha for Muhammad Ali Akhtar, for Mumtaz Begum, and for Sayyid Muhammad Ali Abidi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Discovering Happiness, an overview of the 4 fascinating faculties. The religion of Islam is a very simple religion. Oftentimes, however, unfortunately, it's us who make it complicated. And I want to give a quick example of wudu. Wudu is a very simple thing for us to do. and it consists of pretty much just 4 things: the 2 washes and the 2 wipes. You wash your face, you wash your arms, then you wipe the top of your head, and you wipe the top of your feet, the right foot first, the left foot next. It's very simple. There are many mustahabbat: gargling 3 times with water, drawing water through your nostrils, brushing your teeth. All of these kinds of things are mustahabbat. And it's very important for us to stay connected and true to what is wajib. Now, why am I saying this? And why am I starting with this fiqhi masail? It's because, look, we're living in a post-2020 world, and it can become very, very confusing for us. And in this world of corruption and confusion, it's very important for us to recognize those things which matter most. The Holy Quran tells us, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. Corruption has appeared in land and sea because of what? Because of what the hands of men have wrought. You see, there is a natural balance that has been created by Allah. It is we human beings who have come into the picture and disrupted that natural balance. And so things might seem confusing at times. We'll notice that ignorance is being presented as knowledge. We'll notice that the air is full of a lot of hatred and disgust. And there is an essence of anger and rage and fury and discontent in the world that we find ourselves in. Oftentimes, we will find ourselves awake at night, ruminating. That's where we're just circulating these thoughts round and round and round in our minds, negative thoughts, negative energy. And so we can't find rest. And in the midst of all of this, we find ourselves asking a very important, fundamental question, which at times may seem trivial, but inshallah, we're going to show how it's actually very important. And that question is, where is happiness in all of this? Where do we find happiness? Where does the religion of Islam give us happiness? How am I to find it? And first of all, before we dive into this discussion, we have to define what happiness is. What do we actually mean by happiness? Because we find in the society that we are born and raised in, and we find ourselves surrounded by mass media and entertainment and all sorts of manipulations of the mind, again, created by the hands of man, the definition of happiness has been obscured for us. And so I'd like to point out, before we begin this search for discovering happiness, that happiness is not the fulfillment of pleasures. This is a way that society has defined it for us. And so we go seeking for those pleasures and we never find that happiness. In fact, happiness is contentment with what we have. Happiness is not the fulfillment of temporary thrills and temporary excitement. Rather, it is to find that balance, that equilibrium, that tranquility, which Allah has created in the first place. The Quran tells us, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Surely in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. And we've all heard this verse before. And even as I'm saying these things, it might seem like a bit of a cliche, but inshallah, during this discussion, we're going to discover that actually there is a reality behind it that can free our minds and give us that happiness that each and every one of us deserves. Thus comes into the picture the 4 fascinating faculties. And I'm going to go over these very quickly to begin with, and then later on we're going to divide them and actually analyze each one of these faculties. And this is what the basis of our discussion is going to be in subsequent discussions. The 4 fascinating faculties: number 1 is the aql, the intellect. Number 2 is the wahm, or the imagination. Number 3 is the desire, or shahwa. And number 4 is ghadab, anger. And we're going to come back to them. I know that might have gone over your head. We're going to come back to them, and we're going to discuss just how fundamental to our understanding these 4 fascinating faculties truly are. First of all, where do we find these 4 faculties? Is this just a theory that, we've popped out of nowhere? No. This is something which is discussed by Imam Khomeini, by Ayatollah Dastghaib Shirazi, by many of the mystics and great scholars that we have. In fact, if you go to any of the books of akhlaq, you will find allusions and insinuations towards these four faculties. Before we go into them and divide them and discuss them in greater detail, let's talk about some of the benefits that we will gain from exploring and understanding these four faculties. Number one of the benefits that we will gain is a better comprehension. A better comprehension, a better understanding of the world around us, people around us, our destiny. In fact, we will gain a better comprehension of life, the universe, and everything. More than that, we will gain an understanding of ourself. As the Bible says, know thyself, and you shall know thy Lord. If you know yourself, you're going to know your creator better. And there are, there's lots of hadith and even verses of the Quran, which inshallah we're going to talk about very briefly before moving on, which also echo this theme, that the better we know ourselves, the better we will know our creator. And so we find that the Quran says that Allah's signs are everywhere. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. He says, my signs are everywhere. And within yourselves, do you not then see? You see, so through these four faculties, we're going to better understand that idea. We'll also gain a better comprehension of the deen and a deeper understanding of the words of the Holy Quran and the Ma'asumeen. Oftentimes we'll stumble across many hadith and verses of the Quran and it won't really make that much sense. When we understand the four faculties, suddenly those words of the Ahlul Bayt and of the Quran will suddenly start to make more sense for us. We will also gain something which is vital for our self-development, and that is motivation, more particularly self-motivation. The Holy Quran says, Ya ayyuhal insan, O human beings, innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqi. It says, O human beings, you are striving, you are laboring towards your Lord, a hard striving, and you are going to meet him. But sometimes we find ourselves becoming lazy, becoming lethargic. We don't want to get up in the morning. We just can't find the energy that we need to accomplish those things that we know we wish to accomplish. Through understanding the four faculties, we will gain that self-motivation. And another benefit, and the final benefit that I'd like to say, is self-control. Understanding the four faculties, and this is perhaps the most important benefit of all, understanding these four faculties, we will actually be able to combat the shaitan. The Quran refers to him as aduwwun mubin. He is to you an open and manifest enemy. And so we will be armed with the ability to fight back against that ultimate enemy. Now, before we go into the discussion, a bit of a disclaimer here. This, understanding these four faculties, is a tool, a very essential tool that will help us in our progress and self-development. But it will only benefit us, and we will only gain all of these benefits, inshallah, if we take it away and contemplate over it. Very essential, very, very important. If we don't take it away and contemplate over it, then it's likely we won't benefit from it at all. And so I'm going to be giving examples, and these are going to be general examples as we discuss the four faculties. But it's really important for you to find your own examples in your own life. Go away, discuss it with family, discuss it with friends, draw, mind map, brainstorm, and thus I'd like to ask everybody to have a pen and paper with them. Instinctively, people are going to be reaching for their phones, but I'd like to emphasize, please do try, if you can, to have a pen and paper handy. Trust me, guys, it's going to help a heck of a lot, especially when we're dividing these 4 faculties and we keep jumping back and forth between them. It can appear to be a little bit confusing. If you have a pen and paper, then it will help. And some of you might be thinking, well, I can't leave the screen because I'll miss out on what Shaykh is saying. And you know, it's better if I just stay. No, I'm going to be speaking about just getting a pen and paper for the next 30 seconds. So please do feel free to go and get a pen and paper. Taking notes is a very important skill that we need to develop. And it helps us everywhere in life, whether we're university students, whether we're listening to a lecture online, whether we're, you know, whatever we're doing, whether we're in school, university, work, whether we're in a board meeting, taking notes. And the form in which we take notes also can help us to gain a better, we can digest the ideas that have been presented much, much better. And just very quickly, what do I mean by taking notes? It depends on how you think. That's right, we're going to be exploring a lot about how different people think and how different people learn. It depends on how you think and how you learn. There might be some people who learn from lists. In that case, make a list. But I'd like to suggest that we make brainstorms. We try to brainstorm and mind map our ideas, whether that's, you know, drawing circles or drawing arrows or little doodles, whatever it is, to help us to retain that understanding and that knowledge. And also, when you have a pen and paper, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, you can write down your questions. Many a times people say, I thought of a question during the lecture, but then when the Q&A session started, I forgot it. Well, if you have a pen and paper handy, you won't forget it, inshallah, because you'll write that question down. So we're going to dive right into the discussion now with a loud and boisterous salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam once was seeing that a battalion of the Muslims was returning from the battlefield. Now, when we listen to these hadith, try to visualize it. Let's try to actually imagine what it was like. So these people, just think about it. They're tired. Some of them might have injuries. Imagine one of them might have an arrow sticking out of him. They're sweating. Some of them are carrying the injured and the wounded and the dead with them. At this point, our Holy Prophet turns to them and he says, congratulations at having completed the lesser jihad. They say, Ya Rasulullah, if that was the lesser jihad, what is the greater jihad? And the Holy Prophet tells them, it is the jihad against the nafs. Now, many of us have already heard this hadith, but now let's explore it a little bit deeper. Imam Khomeini speaks about this in a beautiful way in his book, Chail Hadith, 40 Hadith. In the very first chapter, he's talking about this idea of the jihad against the nafs. And to paraphrase and to conclude some of the discussion, what we have to do, dear brothers and sisters and respected elders, is actually try to literally imagine that this battle is taking place within us. There is an entire kingdom within us, and there are armies trying to fight with each other to take over that kingdom. If the armies of good and light and justice take over, then you as a human being will become an all-rounded Muslim and mu'min, and you will walk towards the light of Allah. But if the forces of evil and the forces of shaitan take over that inner kingdom, then we will become asfala safilin, the lowest of the low. Now, these armies, in the context of our discussion today, I'd like to say that there are actually 4 armies. And each of these 4 armies has a king who is leading those armies. Okay, so what are these armies and who are the kings who are leading them within us? The first of them is aql, the intellect. Okay? So on your paper and your pen, you write down aql, intellect. In Arabic, it's aql. In English, we would translate it as intellect. Okay? This is the first one. And this is your best friend. This is, and if you want to visualize this king, imagine it inside your head. He's there, and he is this humble, wise man, and he's sitting on a throne, on a very, very humble throne, on a wooden chair. That's his throne, that's it. He's very wise. The faculty of intellect is an angelic, divine faculty. It connects you straight to the divine realms of the angels. Remember, the angels were created with only the intellect. They don't have the other lower faculties. So that's aql. Then let's come to the second faculty. What's the second faculty? It is the wahm. We translate it as the imagination. The imagination. Okay? The third faculty is ghadab, the faculty of anger. And the fourth and final faculty is the faculty of shahwa, desire. We would loosely translate it as desire. Okay, so now let's personify these faculties so that we can really grasp them. I want it, inshallah, to really sit into our minds, because as we progress, it will really help us to better grasp this idea. This is another king. Now imagine him, he's this crazy, artistic, mad scientist type person, and he really wants to create. That's what he really wants to do. Then you go to ghadab, the faculty of anger. This is a stern, angry king who's sitting on a throne and he's surrounded by flames. Then you go to the faculty of the wahm. It's the imagination within you. The desire. The fourth and final faculty is shahwa, the desire. And now imagine this king. He is a fat, beastly king, and he's sitting on a plush cushion, and he just wants to be fed and satisfied constantly. Okay. Now that we have a visualization of what these four faculties are and how they exist within our essence, within our actual being, we have to recognize that each of these four kings is fighting with one another. And what they're doing is trying to pull and take over your inner kingdom. At all times, this is taking place. The wahm is putting all sorts of imaginations inside you. The ghadab is always trying to burn everything. He's always trying to get angry. And he's trying to unleash this rage upon the world. And the shahwa is constantly saying, satisfy me, I just want everything for me. Why are these faculties, whenever they are discussed by the great mystics and by the scholars, why do they describe them as quwwa, as powers? Because when you look at shahwa and desire, you look at ghadab, anger, you think of them immediately as something negative. But actually, they are all positive. As long as the intellect, that supremely intellectual faculty, is in charge of the kingdom, then the other three faculties will always bow to the will of the intellect, and they will always actually be nothing but positive. So first, let's look at the positive aspects and elements of these four faculties. Intellect is positive anyway because it connects you immediately to the divine and to the angelic realm. Let's go to the wahm. Why is the wahm a positive attribute and a positive power that we have? The wahm, the imagination, is loosely defined as the eyes of the heart, while the intellect lets you see that which is. It is the imagination which allows you to see the unseen. And so it's a very vital part of who we are as human beings. Without the faculty of imagination, there are so many things that we would never be able to even try to comprehend. And I'll give some examples. Jannah, the Holy Quran says Jannah. All the time, it's constantly saying Jannah. تجري من تحتها الأنهار, beneath which are flowing these rivers. Now, the intellect can only tell us that, yes, Jannah exists. But when it comes to the specifics of how that Jannah exists, how that paradise exists, what the fruits of paradise taste like, what those rivers really are, only the imagination can help us to try to grasp what that really is. The reality may be completely different to what we perceive. You see? Similarly, angels. You know, the intellect will tell us that, yes, angels do exist. However, only the imagination will tell us maybe it looks like this. Angels have wings according to the ahadith. But what form do those wings take? Are they physical? Are they immaterial? Are they celestial? Are they made of light? Only the imagination will take us that step further. Okay? And the thing which I imagine to be an angel and that which you envision to be an angel and the next person and the next person, they're all going to be different. Allah really does only know, and the prophets and Ahlul Bayt and those who have witnessed the angels, only they really intellectually comprehend what those things are. You and I can only try to imagine. Similarly, the soul, the Holy Quran tells us, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you about the ruh, they ask you about the soul. قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. The Quran says, tell them, the soul is from the command of my Lord. Now, when it comes, we can understand that the soul exists, of course, from the intellect, but only the imagination can help us to try to grasp what that soul really is, and we're only imagining. Okay? And another very, very important thing that the faculty of imagination does for us is it helps us to understand empathy. It gives us empathy. So, for example, if there's somebody in front of us and they're frowning or they're crying, the intellect will tell us that, yes, they're frowning or they're crying, but only empathy, our imagination, will help us to put ourselves into that person's shoes and try to imagine how they might be feeling. There might be somebody who's gone through a tragedy in their lives, which we've never experienced. The imagination is what will help us to put ourselves into their position and try to think about how they might be feeling. So, inshallah, from these examples, we can see that the imagination is a fundamental part of who we are. And without it, there is so much that we won't be able to accomplish. It is when it is under the governorship of the intellect, it will always guide us towards good and positive things. Similarly, let's come to the faculty of anger now. You think of anger as a really bad thing. Anger is obviously a bad thing, right? But actually, no, anger is a beautiful thing. Why? Because the anger actually helps us to fight against injustice. You see, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His infinite wisdom, has created has good in it. It's we who have complicated it and turned it into something bad. Anger, we've been hardwired with this feeling of anger, so that whenever we see some sort of injustice or oppression taking place, the faculty of anger gets triggered and it says, this must stop, and it must stop now. As long as the anger is being governed, again, by the intellect, this is what the faculty of anger will do. And the faculty of anger is actually something which is our guardian force. It protects us. It's a very positive thing. It actually triggers our fight or flight response. That's right. The faculty of anger doesn't only deal with getting angry and fighting against something, it also deals with getting scared and running away, escaping from something. And so the intellectual reason for why anger should be triggered is, for example, if you see a lion and you don't get scared and run away, there's something wrong with you. You need to allow that faculty of anger and that faculty of fear to trigger sometimes. Otherwise, injustice, oppression, tyranny, and all sorts of dangers will destroy us. And so anger, the faculty of anger, is a positive thing also. Now let's come to shahwa, desire. We immediately think of this as a bad thing. Shahwa, lust, desire, it's an evil thing, right? But actually, no, again, it's a very positive thing as long as it is being governed by the intellect. Why? Because it's the faculty of shahwa, the faculty of desire, which tells us this tastes good, this feels good. It tells us that this is giving me enjoyment, and therefore it's a good thing, right? Generally speaking, this is the way that the world works, and this is the way that Allah has actually designed the world around us. Generally speaking, we're going to come to the negatives as well. Generally speaking, if it tastes good, it's good for you. Of course, there are exceptions, which we're going to come to, inshallah. But in short, the faculty of desire is fundamental for us to enjoy the fruits of the world around us. And without it, we just won't enjoy anything. What's the, why? We're not enjoying anything anymore. And so we become almost dead inside. We don't want that to happen. Okay. Now, what happens when our intellect is not governing our inner kingdom? This is when all hell breaks loose, figuratively and literally, okay? When the faculty of intellect gets overpowered by one of the other 3 or 4 armies inside us, that's when everything goes wrong. And this perfect and simple balance gets entirely disrupted, okay? So each of the faculties, when they take over, terrible things take place. First, let's talk about the imagination. Very important, guys, to differentiate between the faculty of imagination and the faculty of aql and intellect. At first glance, we might be mistaken into thinking that these two are exactly the same. But no, Islam teaches us to differentiate between the two. Aql, intellect, tells us that which is certain, whereas the imagination tells us and deals with that which may be certain. Again, it's dealing with the unseen. And many of the things that we imagine may be correct, but many of the things that we imagine may be entirely incorrect, okay? And so the wahm, the imagination, as well as being a very good thing that helps us to understand angels and heaven and hell, and it helps us to have empathy for others, it's also the playground of shaitan. Yes, the playground of shaitan. In the not the next session, but the session after that, we're going to be exploring this in far greater detail and really recognizing what the imagination is and what it's doing to us and how the shaitan is using our imagination against us will truly empower us, inshallah. But for now, it suffices to say that all those negative thoughts, all those anxieties, all those irrational fears, they exist in the faculty of imagination. And as long as it's not being governed by the intellect, it will completely destroy us internally and outwardly. It will completely ravish us. And so the intellect tells us that God is one. It is an entirely intellectual premise to realize and recognize that God is one. Anytime you see any traces of polytheism, you should know that it comes from the imagination, because only the imagination can come, and shaitan comes into that place and he treats it like his playground, and he divides that pure oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he makes us think of God as multiple things. And this might be something that we think that we as Muslims are free from, but actually, no, we're not. And we're going to find out how we still need to fight and free ourselves entirely of shirk, of polytheism. Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha, in sermon number 470, not sermon, sorry, in the wise saying 470, he says something very remarkable. He's actually asked, what is Tawheed? What is this Tawheed? It's the basis of our very religion. What is it, Ya Ali? Imam Ali alayhi salam responds and he says, At-Tawheedu an la tatawahhamahu. He says, Tawheed, very eloquently, Tawheed is that you do not bring Allah into your imagination. Very quickly, does this mean that we should not imagine Allah? Perhaps what Imam Ali alayhi salam is alluding to in this wise and eloquent saying is not that necessarily that you should not ever imagine Allah, but rather that you should recognize that that which you are imagining Allah to be, Allah is far greater than that. Okay, the intellect only takes you to a certain level. Allah is one. Allah is the creator of all things. But you see, the imagination has to take over at a certain point because we cannot even comprehend intellectually what infinity is, let alone Allah. Imagine a concept like infinity, like limitlessness, like eternity. These concepts, Allah is far greater than these concepts. And yet, our intellect cannot even comprehend these lowly concepts. And so the imagination has to play its role in trying to grasp what those things are and what Allah is. But the important thing, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, is to recognize that that thing that you just imagined is not Allah. In fact, Allah is the God of that thing that you just imagined. And this may be some part of the wisdom behind why takbir is so important. Why do we say Allahu Akbar? Before we're starting the salah, we say Allahu Akbar. And then numerous times throughout the salah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Why? People translate Allahu Akbar as Allah is the greatest. But actually, a more precise translation would be Allah is greater. Right? The Arabic is actually saying Allah is greater. Greater than what? Perhaps it may be alluding to this very concept, that whatever you bring into your mind and you think is Allah, we have to say Allahu Akbar and recognize Allah is greater than that. When you're praying salah, you're reciting Surah Fatiha, you're reciting the other surah, and you're imagining yourself to be standing before your Lord. And so within that, you've imagined Allah as before you. At that moment, you must say Allahu Akbar. Recognize that Allah is greater than that. And so here, we don't want to dwell too much on that. The basic point here is that the imagination, while it is a very good tool to help us to understand the unseen, we have to also recognize that it's the playground of shaitan. And so many false ideas and false beliefs exist there. And shaitan is constantly playing with our imagination. He puts all sorts of evil thoughts into our mind. Shirk is the root. Don't think that when we have shirk in our minds, when we're attributing partners to Allah, we're going to be happy. No, we're not. Because it is precisely from shirk that all forms of anxieties, irrational fears, pains, anguishes, and suffering appears. Okay? It is the imagination which tells you you are not able to accomplish anything. It's the imagination which tells you you can't do such and such thing. It's the imagination that tells you your suffering, your pain will never end. You can't get out of the trap and the problem that you've fallen into. It's the imagination that tells you that your sins are so great that Allah will never forgive you. But if you go back to the intellect, you'll see that it's telling you an entirely different and positive picture. Okay. Now let's come to anger. If the intellect is not governing our anger, then the anger, this furious angry, frowning king within us with flames all around him, he will burn down everything within our inner kingdom, and he will not stop until we burn everybody around us, our friends, our family. He won't stop until we burn ourselves, and he will lead us to the fires of hell eternally. Okay? And similarly, the shahwa. We talked about the positives of shahwa and desire. Now let's look quickly at the negatives. Remember, we visualized shahwa, this desire, as a big, fat, beastly king on a plush throne. And so he's constantly calling towards his own satisfaction. And if it is not governed by the intellect, it will take us towards drugs, to sugar addiction, to other addictions. It will take us towards addiction to videos and video games. He will take away everything that has any meaning or significance or importance for us, and he will turn us into the lowest of the low, worse than the animals, and he will turn us into lustful beasts that just want to sleep all the time, because sleep is also a pleasure, and we just become completely, our God becomes our desire. The Quran says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you not seen he who takes his lower desire as his God? And so we become completely serving this lower desire of ours. All right. So we've talked now about the positives and the negatives of these four faculties. They will all be functioning correctly and perfectly as long as the intellect is governing the other three. But if the intellect fails in its duty, then the other three faculties will take over and they will attribute the most negative of traits and qualities. Now we come to the fundamental question of today's discussion, which is, where is happiness? Where do we find happiness in all of this? And so we have to recognize that happiness must exist in one of these four faculties. And some may think that happiness exists in the imagination. Some may think that, if I imagine great things and positive things, then it will make me happy. If I imagine myself as successful, it will make me happy. Others might assume that if I express my anger and I get it out of my system, it's going to give me happiness. Others might think that if I, get what I desire and fulfill my pleasures, it will give me happiness. And the answer, of course, is no. None of these three lower faculties will ever give us happiness. Where does happiness truly exist? Happiness exists in the faculty of intellect, in the aql. And at first we might think that this doesn't make sense, because we've been raised in a society that teaches us that the more intelligent you get, the less happy you get. Islam is actually teaching us the opposite. Imam Ali alayhi salam, in a very fascinating hadith, which can be found in Bihar al-Anwar in volume 78, page 7, he says, Aslul aqli, the root and the foundation of your intellect is al-qudra, is power. It gives you strength. وَثَمَرَتُهَا السُّرُورُ, and the fruit of that intellect is happiness. And I want to illustrate this, and when you come across this hadith, you just read it and you think, what is Imam Ali alayhi salam really talking about? I can't grasp it. But let's try here to actually try to come to some understanding of the great wisdom that exists in this hadith, and many such a hadith like it, by the way. There are many hadith which allude to this idea. Now, if we look at the faculties, right, I want us now to visualize something else. A comic strip. And if you've got your pen and paper in front of you, inshallah, you can maybe try to draw it to help you to remember it. Imagine this for a moment, okay? A comic strip. In the first picture, what you're going to imagine is a person who is very frustrated, they're very angry, and they're complaining to a wise man. Above their head, I want you to visualize that there is a big speech bubble. And in that speech bubble, it says in big letters, I want happiness. Okay, so this person is complaining, they're frustrated, they're angry, and above their head is a speech bubble. It says, I want happiness. In the next frame, what you're going to visualize is the wise man coming towards the frustrated man with an eraser, and he's reaching up and he's erasing the part where it says, I want. Now, in the third and final frame, what you're going to see is the person who was initially frustrated and complaining, he's actually happy. And above his head is the very same speech bubble, but now it simply says happiness. And so that happiness is now accomplished. Why? He got rid of the I want. And it might seem very simple, and actually it is actually that simple, frustratingly simple. But this is what Islam is constantly drawing us towards, to recognize that happiness is the default state of humanity. You were born with it. It's part of your fitrah. It's your divine innate nature. You were created and hardwired with it. And this is why the prophets and imams are constantly calling you towards the intellect. If we look at the other three faculties, they all have wants. This king, the Wahm, is constantly saying, I want to create. The king of anger, he's fiery and he just says, I want to be expressed. The king of desire, he's constantly driving you towards his own satisfaction. He's saying, I want to be satisfied. But when you come to the wise and humble king, which is within you, and you're going to recognize that it's within you in subsequent sessions, inshallah, and you're going to see how Islam has literally told us that this exists within us. That wise and honorable king, what does he want? What does the faculty of intellect want? Absolutely nothing. The faculty of intellect, when you turn to it, you'll recognize all it says is, I am, and Allah is. I am, and Allah is. Now just imagine yourself, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, just for a moment, remove from yourself. Just imagine it doesn't exist. Imagine your faculty of imagination doesn't exist. Uncertainties, that which is unseen, those things which I can't be sure about, put them aside for a moment. Put aside your anger, everything that you might be angry about and frustrated about and upset about, put it aside. Put aside your shahwa and your desires. I want this, I want to go to the bathroom, I want the sheikh to hurry up with his lecture, I want to get to the end of this, I want food, I want a snack, I want tea, I want donuts, whatever it might be. Put all those I wants aside. What are you really left with as a human being? Your intellect. And you'll realize at that very moment that you are and Allah is. And that's all that matters and all that ever mattered. At that point, when you get connected to your supreme and divine intellect, which Imam Ali alayhi salam, by the way, himself refers to as your Rasul, your inner prophet, when you get connected to that, you're going to see nothing but beauty in the world. All your complaints have just gone away. You're going to look at things completely differently. You're going to see that the sky is above you and it's this beautiful blue canopy. You're going to see the trees in their beautiful greenness and the birds flying. You're going to see yourself, your own creation, your existence in this strange world, and you're going to see it as nothing but beautiful. How, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, when we recognize this, how can we not arrive at happiness? أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. The Quran is constantly telling us, do you not use your rationality? إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. The Quran, Allah is speaking to us and He's telling us, we have guided you to the way. You may be thankful or you may be unthankful, ungrateful. You might do kufr, disbelief. Okay? When we recognize this and get connected to the intellect, inshallah, we recognize that there is everything to be thankful for. Now, some may say that when we're talking about connecting to this intellect and we talk about Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, in the Surah Fajr of the Quran, we see that Allah is referring, according to many of the tafsirs, this verse is actually referring to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he is referred to as the self-assured soul. And the idea here is no matter what trials and tribulations you might be facing, what darknesses and what pains and anguishes you might be surrounded by, there is this tranquility and balance and peace that you find within yourself. And it gives you this happiness. But some may say that, look, when we're talking about Karbala, we see pain, suffering, and there's sorrow there. Where is the happiness? Three things that we want to say here. Number one, sadness and happiness are two parts, two sides of the very same coin. We'll often notice that somebody who's gone through a tragedy, some sort of pain, when they, for example, a loved one has passed away, sometimes they fail to express that sorrow and grief that's within themselves. And so they hold it in. And what happens at this point is, because they haven't expressed that grief, they never experience happiness either. It's a very sad thing that happens. When you don't express that sadness and let the tears flow, you also miss out on a great deal of happiness that comes thereafter. Whatever pains and suffering and sorrow you might be going through, the du'as of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and Islam generally teaches us to look at that sad thing in our lives. Don't think of it as something trivial, as something beneath you, as something low. No, recognize that this thing has caused you sadness. If you don't recognize that sadness, if you don't hold on to it, what happens? The faculties completely switch themselves off. They say, I don't want anything to do with this. You go numb. You neither feel happiness, nor do you feel sadness, nor do you feel anything. And this may be part of the reason why people go through depression. They fail to let that sad and sorrowful energy flow through them. And so they deprive themselves of happiness as well. Okay? It's two sides of the same coin. That's the first point. The second point is only those who weep for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein recognize this strange happiness that coincides with the sorrow deep within us. Right? When we let those tears flow, there's a strange mixture of happiness and sadness that is unexplainable. Only those who experience the tears will recognize it. And the third thing is, Imam Khomeini was the one who said that they mock us for our tears at crying for Sayyid al-Shuhada. And they call us a nation of tears. But with these tears, we have overthrown the tyrant. Therein lies the key, dear brothers and sisters, respected elders, that through these tears, we can wash away the tyranny that exists within our hearts, and we can liberate the inner kingdom of our souls from our shahwa, from our desire, from our imaginations and the insinuations of shaitan, and from our angers and pains. Let us go now to a heavenly tent. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Let us go now to a heavenly tent in a desert. Imagine it now, and there is light all around it. The companions of Hussein are all around. They are all reciting the dhikr of Allah and reciting the Quran. Imam Sajjad is sick in his bed. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is there. Sayyidah Zainab is there tending to Imam Sajjad. And Joan is there, and he is preparing the sword of Hussein and his battle armor. At this point, Hussein recites some poetry. Imam Sajjad hears this poetry, and he recognizes that Hussein is announcing that he will soon be leaving this lowly world. Imam Sajjad thinks not of himself. Instead, he glances at his auntie, Sayyidah Zainab, and they say that at this point, Sayyidah Zainab breaks down in tears. And she goes to Imam Hussein and she says, "Oh, my brother, when my grandfather left this world, I assured myself and I told myself that it's okay. My mother Fatima is still here. When my mother Fatima was martyred, I assured myself, I said, it's okay. My father Ali is still here. He is my Imam. When Imam Ali was martyred, I assured myself and said, Hassan is still here. My brother Hassan is still the Imam. And when he was martyred, I assured myself and said, it's okay. Hussein, my brother, is still here. And now, Hussein, you are giving me news of your martyrdom. This was very difficult upon Zainab. Imam Hussein tells Zainab, "Oh, Zainab, you must be patient for the tragedies that are to come, for I shall leave this world, but you must be there to gather up the children and the women after I have gone." And so, when the tragedy of Karbala had taken place, but it was not over yet, for there is somebody who must gather everybody. There is somebody who must go to this mother who has lost her sons and she is grieving. There is somebody who must go to this sister who has lost her brother. There is somebody who must go and console this wife who has lost her husband and she is weeping. There is somebody who must go to the children who are still weeping from thirst and gather them all together and protect them as the assailants come to attack the tents of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. That someone was none other than Sayyidah Zainab. She is running back and forth trying to gather everybody together. And in the midst of this, she goes to the blessed head of Hussein. She goes and she kneels down by the head of Hussein. And she says, "Wa Muhammad, salli alayka malaika as-sama." Oh, Muhammad, the angels send blessings from the heavens. Hada Husaynun muramminun bid-dima. This is Hussein, drenched in blood. منقطع الأعضاء. His body has been cut to pieces. وبناتك سبايا. And his daughters have been taken prisoner. إلى الله المشتكى. To Allah is my complaint. وإلى محمد المصطفى. وإلى علي المرتضى. وإلى فاطمة الزهراء. وإلى حمزة السيد الشهداء. Oh, dear brothers, oh, mourners, oh, Hussein, we must recognize that this is Sayyidah Zainab, that it is after all of these things that she has witnessed with her own eyes. This is the miracle of Zainab, when she is brought before Yazid, and Yazid strikes the blessed head of Hussein with a stick. And he says, "Are you pleased with what your Lord did with Hussein?" At this point, Sayyidah Zainab says, ما رأيت إلا جميلا. I saw nothing but beauty. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. حسين 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 اہل ایمان قوتی ما یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. اہل ایمان قوتی ما یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. روحی دل کھول کے مظلومی شبیر پر روحی دل کھول کے مظلومی شبیر پر ڈھونڈتے ہیں قلب زہرا کی دعائیں آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. اہل ایمان قوت ایمان یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. آپ کا احسان ہے سارے جہاں پر حسین آپ کا احسان ہے سارے جہاں پر حسین. کس طرح اہل زمانہ بھول جائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. اہل ایمان قوت ایمان یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. نہر سے جلائے رو کر سکینہ نے کہا نہر سے جلائے رو کر سکینہ نے کہا اے چاچا ہم دیتے ہیں کب سے صدائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. اہل ایمان قوت ایمان یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. حر کی عظمت حر سے کہتی ہے یہی بارہ حر کی عظمت حر سے کہتی ہے یہی بارہ. آئیے ہم مولا سے کہہ کر بخشوائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. اہل ایمان قوت ایمان یوں دکھلائے آپ کو کربلا والوں کا واقعہ سنائے آپ کو. حسین حسین.
متوجہ سے السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکم یا نبی اللہ السلام علیکم یا امیر المؤمنین السلام علیکم یا سید المرسلین السلام علیکم یا فاطمة الزہرا سیدۃ النساء العالمین السلام علیکم یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ ام المؤمنین السلام علیکم یا حسن المجتبی امیر المؤمنین السلام علیکم یا ابا عبداللہ وعلى الارواح التي حلت بثنائك عليكم مني جميع سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت بقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر مني بسيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك عامة المسلمين ابن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة القائم المنتصر المهدي سيدي أجل الله تعالى فرجا وسهل الله تعالى مخرجا وزبورا. اللهم اجعلنا من أولك وأنصارك والمستشهدين بين يديك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. Brothers and sisters, thank you very much for joining the session today. We now have a question and answer session, and I guess the way this will kind of work is if you've got anything, then please post your question on the chat on Zoom. If you're joining in via YouTube, then please send it on to YouTube. We have someone who's gonna have it up ready to ask to Shaykh. So any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and say so, or do let us know in the chat if you have anything. Just getting the YouTube up to see if we have any questions there. Shaykh, thank you very much for your first lecture. I'm looking forward to the remaining ones as well. It was very informative. I guess one question I'll kind of start off with regarding what you were saying is, you mentioned towards the end of your lecture regarding how there is a special happiness the mourners of Imam Hussein alayhi salam feel. Could you elaborate a little bit why that is, why having that grief for Imam Hussein allows us to have that special level of happiness in our life, basically?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'd like to encourage people to please do ask questions, because like the silly, you might have a question that you think is really silly, but actually the silliest question oftentimes is the question that you don't ask. As for your question, brother, it's a really good question. And if we have more time, we'll explore it, inshallah. But the main idea is that, look, these faculties and emotions have been put into us for a reason. And if we don't express them in the right way, and express them at regular intervals as they have been designed to be expressed, then there's going to be a blockage in ourselves. And what that will do is stop us from experiencing God's best, or the actual experience of life. There's a concept that we studied in English literature back in my university days, and it was the concept of catharsis. And catharsis is basically, it's a mixture between happiness and sadness almost. And it usually happens at the climax of a movie. So if you can imagine, right at that moment where the hero has been going through all sorts of struggles, and then finally they overcome the bad guy, or that win takes place, you get overwhelmed with emotions, and that emotion is referred to as catharsis. And so catharsis is it's a very fundamental human emotion, and it is incredibly powerful. It's the reason why happiness, on a lower level, you'll describe it as smiling and, I'm happy. But actually, the extreme levels of happiness, when somebody experiences that, you'll notice that actually they just start crying. That's what we're actually looking for. And those are the kind of tears that we express for Ashura and Karbala. Very quickly, the tears that we have for Karbala, a very great scholar actually once said that, look, it's mistakenly taken as tears of regret and afsus, but actually that's not what it is. It is, in fact, this beautiful, cathartic crying. That's what we're actually experiencing, inshallah, because in a weird way, we're actually witnessing, similar to Sayyidah Zainab, of course, we could never get close to her. We're witnessing something similar to that beauty that she saw. I hope that gave you some food for thought.
Gee, definitely. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was very good. I'm definitely looking forward to you elaborating that topic in the coming nights as well. We have one question from the Zoom. We have two questions. I'll ask the first one. So the first one is from Summer M. Salam, I love the topic and I'm excited to know more. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the negative aspects of three of the inner kingdoms, but is there a negative aspect of aql?
Yeah, very good question. Inshallah, in the next session, we're going to be talking about the aql particularly, and the short answer is no. Aql has no negative traits. There's actually a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam where he says that, look, the aql is pure, it's immune from any kind of satanic insinuations. And that's why it's so important for us to get connected to the aql. It can only guide us towards that which is good, righteous, and better for us. It's infallible. It's immaculate. It's your inner prophet. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I hope that answered your question, Sister Sabra. Perfect. Thank you. The next one we have from Brother Niall Muswi. The next question we have is, what is an example of a good way of expressing anger?
Oh yeah, please do stay tuned for the the fourth lecture, inshallah. We're going to be talking about anger, but there's lots of positive ways to express your anger. And in short, in a nutshell, it's when you express your anger at sins, at evil, at oppression, at, for example, if you see a lady in the road and she's being, I don't know, like mugged or something and harassed. If you get angry at that point and you say, hey, leave her alone, that's a good anger.
Yeah. Very very well explained. Yeah, thank you very much. And then next question we got is happiness we get from materialistic things not allowed in Islam?
No, happiness from materialistic things, more pleasure from materialistic things. Islam pushes us towards actually gaining the most pleasure out of life. And you're going to see, inshallah, in the lecture about shahwa, which is going to be the final lecture, inshallah, how actually Islam is teaching us how to maximally enjoy life, the universe, and the hereafter as well. Islam didn't come to imprison us. It actually came to set us free in so many ways. There's a reason why people went to the Holy Prophet and begged him, look, we want to show gratitude. How do we show thanks to you? And the Quran, Allah tells the Holy Prophet at that point to tell these people, tell them, I ask you nothing in return for this except that you love the Ahlul Bayt. Now, the point here is, why did they come to the Holy Prophet and ask him, how do we show thanks to you? We want to show thanks to you. I mean, does that even occur to us to thank the Holy Prophet for the fact that he's given us Islam? No, because unfortunately we see Islam as a burden. Oh, there's all these rules that we have to follow. We have to pray 5 times a day. We have to keep ourselves hungry in the month of Ramadan. It's a chore, it's tiring, it's boring. No, actually, we're going to see how Islam is actually teaching us to get the most out of life and to enjoy life more than anybody else. Inshallah, stay tuned for that one.
Inshallah. I don't want to go too far into this topic, but I've kind of got a sub-question off of that then. So you said that Islam is trying to free you and trying to make you have the most of the pleasures of life. What response would you give to someone maybe in a Western culture like ours in the UK, who keep looking at us and think, how are you extracting any pleasure from a religion like Islam? It seems like it's very repressive. For women, for example, you have to wear hijab. It seems like a very repressive, backward religion. So what response could we give to those kind of people and say that actually, no, we actually gain pleasure from these following our religion?
Well, the question would have to be in a couple of parts. So firstly, we have to define what that pleasure and what that happiness is, right? So we have to go back to the fundamentals. And we have to say that, look, that which you're defining as happiness is actually just the fulfillment of short-term pleasures. If you go to the research and actually look at it, you'll find that actually the fulfillment of these short-term pleasures in the long term doesn't actually give you happiness. You might be doing all sorts of things which we as Muslims consider to be sins, and you think that you're getting enjoyment from them. But I'd like to ask you to turn around and actually look at it. How much enjoyment are you getting, and how much are you actually damaging yourself, and how much, and I'm talking about damaging your emotional self here, because obviously if we look at an example like alcohol, lots of people will claim that they think that it's making them happy in parties and more confident, etc. But if you look at the damage that it causes, it's way, way, way more. And even if you go and look at the research, it actually makes you more depressed and it creates addiction. And so what you see is there's a pattern occurring in society where, almost like rats, if you look at experiments done on rats and sugar addiction and things like this, we'll notice that there are certain rats which, they go for those short-term pleasures. But then when you monitor the life of these rats, you'll notice that they end up very, very depressed, sad, unhappy, if a rat can be happy or unhappy. And the same thing is happening with humanity. Islam has come to free us out of this cage that we've actually created, society has created around us. It's a control mechanism. We're like rats in a cage, constantly being given treats. And Islam is actually treating us to look at that treat. Imagine if you're a scientist trying to experiment on a rat by giving him little doses of heroin, for example, or cocaine, right? And one of the rats just turns around and says, "No, I'm a Muslim now." And it keeps on going to the corner and facing the Qibla and praying 5 times a day. You just, as a scientist, you just can't control that rat anymore. And that rat now has a sense of peace and happiness in his life. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it's not going to happen because rats don't have the intellectual capacity to accept Islam. But yeah, I mean, it would be a long discussion is my main point, dear brother.
Yeah, I think that definitely does clarify quite a bit there on what kind of response to give. We have another question from Zoom, if I just pop it open. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. All the Prophet on the Quran said, "We do not ask you anything for this message. Allah has our reward." But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ asked us to be kind, love, and respect his family as for bringing us his message. Why did the Prophet ﷺ ask his ummah for a reward for his message while the other prophets did not?
Okay, everything that the Prophet ﷺ did, he did for the sake of the benefit of the ummah and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so even that reward which he's asking for, notice that the Quran, first of all, it's saying, "La as'alukum alayhi ajra." I'm asking you no reward. Okay, so the Prophet's not asking you for money, he's not asking you for wealth, he's not asking you for anything material. I don't want any of that stuff. I want you to love my family. Why? Because when we love that family, we enter paradise. We get rewarded for loving in that family. You see, sometimes when a child, for example, when you love that child, and parents will understand this a lot better, but even those who are not parents yet can understand it and try to grasp it, that look, sometimes you ask the kid to reward you, but actually what you're doing is rewarding the kid, right? So, for example, the Quran also says, "In tansurullaha yansurkum wa yuthabbit aqdamakum." If you help Allah, He will help you and make firm your feet. Now, the first question here is, does Allah need your help? No, He's Ghani. And similarly, the Prophet is only a reflection of Allah. He's the servant of Allah. And so he too needs nothing from you. He's already connected to Allah, right? But the point here is the Prophet, Allah, the Ahlul Bayt, they say things to us for our own sake. And so what we see is the other day, my daughter, for example, she wanted to carry the shopping back to the house. And trust me, it was so much easier for me to just carry it myself. I had to give her a small bag, and then she was dragging it on the ground and she kept on dropping things out of it. And it was painstaking. But I gave her that opportunity. Why? I didn't need her help, but I gave her that opportunity. Why? Because it's good for her own self-development. I know that she'll learn something from that, right? Similarly, when Allah is asking us to help Him while He needs no help, and when the Prophet is asking us to love his family, it's because it's good for us. Otherwise, they've already got their reward in this world and the hereafter. I hope that gave you some food for thought. I think we're out of time.
Gee, yeah, sorry, I was literally about to say that is pretty much end of the session. We've just hit over 1.5 hours. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today, brothers and sisters as well, joining online and on Zoom and on YouTube. Thank you for joining today's session. We hope you did find it useful, and we inshallah look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's session. Again, we're starting 7 p.m. UK time. Shaykh Muzaffer, could you please tell us what the topic will be, inshallah, for tomorrow's lecture?
The topic for tomorrow's lecture will be the aql. Inshallah, we're going to be talking about unlocking the intellect.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And inshallah, we will see everyone there tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Inshallah.
For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Muhammad.